Live from Washington, this is a special Your Voice, Your Future National Town Hall, the new terror threat.
It is an enemy said to be more ferocious than any we've seen. ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, by some estimates 30,000 strong and spreading, with a hallmark of mass killings.
We want to see him home safe and sound.
And execution of kidnapped Americans. Suddenly, the book President Obama closed on this war is again open, with worries of a terrifying sequel.
In many ways, ISIL is beyond al-Qaeda because they're truly barbaric.
Armed forces are now back in Iraq. Airstrikes underway, but is it enough?
This is not going to be an announcement about U.S. ground troops.
Pinprick bombing is not working. You need some more boots on the ground.
And there is also a war of words. Some members of Congress arguing only they have the power, not the president, to make those decisions.
You got to have Congress for this mission.
While the president clearly does not want to get America involved in another war, we clearly are.
Now worries that by defeating some enemies, the U.S. only creates others.
This is a war for the soul of Islam.
Disenchanted Americans taking up arms against their own.
Some call these people lone wolves. I think of them as lone rats.
From an ISIL leader with a North American accent.
Behind them you can see the officer's residence filled with bullet holes.
To a Chicago area teen accused of trying to join the jihad.
For many people in the West who have problems with identity or belonging, this is an answer.
And the FBI struggling to keep tabs on anyone intent on making American soil the next target.
Joining us for tonight's town hall, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, a CIA-trained senior operations officer, Zainab Chaudhry, Maryland Outreach Manager for the Council on American Islamic Relations, Michael Steele, political analyst and former Republican Party chairman, Colonel Douglas McGregor, decorated combat veteran of Desert Storm, Faheem Younus, president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Men's Association, Washington, D.C.'s Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and Omri Sirin, Senior Advisor for Strategy at the Israel Project. Now, here are ABC7's Leon Harris and Allison Starling.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Artisphere. Here tonight for the next hour, we expect that we're going to have a very spirited and informative discussion about the new terror threat, ISIL, and what the U.S. is doing about it.
Absolutely. And we are joined now by our senior political reporter, Scott Thuman. He will be with us tonight here in our social media center, getting your questions, your thoughts, anything you may want to contribute tonight to this town hall. And we invite you to use the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture.
All right, Scott, with that now, why don't you lay out for us the news of the day?
Well, it's been a very busy 24 hours. Essentially what we have seen, according to CENTCOM and the Pentagon, is 14 airstrikes were conducted by coalition forces. In those airstrikes, we saw 19 targets that were hit, 2 of them considered to be command posts and valuable to ISIL's stronghold, mostly in the area of Kobani. Now, that's a name you're going to hear a lot over the next hour. Kobani is considered to be a strategic town on the border with Turkey. Why is that important? Because if Turkey feels that the threat is crossing the border into that country, perhaps they would be more motivated, or at least this administration hopes so, to possibly put ground forces in play. The argument over whether or not the U.S. will conduct ground force attacks here has already been taken off the table by this administration. They hope Turkey will be the answer for that. So we will chime in on that. We want to hear from you. As Allison mentioned, the hashtag #YourVoiceIsYourFuture. Feel free to reach out to us throughout the program. And with that said, Leon, let's head it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Scott. Now, what we've learned this week is that this operation there in that theater now has been given a name this week. We understand now that it's being called Operation Inherent Resolve. Now, after what we have seen now so far, 3.5 months now of bombing, I would like to know from the panel, first of all, just to get a baseline here, measurement here, from what we have seen and heard over the past 3.5 months, how many of you have confidence that there is a policy and a strategy in place that is going to result in a victory against ISIL? Show of hands. So it's unanimous.
What is unanimous?
The question is, I want to see whether or not you all think that there's a policy and a strategy in place right now that is going to address ISIL in a significant and successful way? We have one. How about this? Let me turn to the audience. We saw what the numbers are here on the stage. Show of hands here in the audience. How many of you are confident that there is a policy or a strategy in place right now that is going to somehow end up in a successful result here in addressing the issue of stopping ISIS? Show of hands. And about the same kind of numbers up here in the audience as well. That's pretty depressing. But there's got to be a reason why people feel that way. This bombing has been going on, as we said, for 3.5 months now. Let me get a sense from each of you, and I want to again stress that we want to keep this. We've got a lot of people here who've got a lot of viewpoints. We want to try to see if we can squeeze in as much information as we can. I want each of you to give me right now, in 30 seconds or less, your take on where we stand after this 3.5-month-long bombing campaign. How would you assess the threat that ISIL now represents, both over there and here at home? I want to start with you, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Well, it's not lost on us that there may be as many as 100 people with American passports in the Mideast fighting for or trying to become fighters for ISIL. On the other hand, ISIL is a group of very organized fanatics. They went into Syria when it was a virtually collapsed state. They have their priorities on straight, and their priorities are to take over the Middle East, not to come into the United States.
Colonel Schaefer, let's start here with you on this end.
Well, the operation ought to be called Incoherent Resolve, not any sort of actual operation. Any operation you actually have has to have a backbone which actually sets out specific strategic objectives you want to achieve. We have none at this point in time. Is ISIS a real threat? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And I would argue we do have to be worried here, because the next step that they're now threatening is suicide bombings here. So if we don't take care of it there, we have to actually start thinking about what we're going to do here to defend our own equities. And let me be clear on this. The whole air campaign right now is a joke. 14 sorties over 24 hours should be 14 sorties every 15 minutes if we're going to win this. We are not committed to winning this in any sort of fashion that I'm aware of militarily. With that said, we also have ISIS being an effective media organization. They've actually gone where al-Qaeda wanted to go and it could never make it. Anwar al-Awlaki set the stage for this. They've mastered it. Everything they do has some level of theater to it. So we really do have to take them seriously. And the other thing that we should mention here is that the Ba'ath Party, Saddam Hussein's old Ba'ath Party, is helping them. They have elements of that, which makes them militarily effective, as well as someone I think that can actually run a country if they put their mind to it. So we have to take it seriously. We haven't yet to date.
Colonel McGregor, would you care to add your thoughts to that?
ISIL presents no significant threat to the United States that secure borders and effective internal policing cannot defeat. So it's no threat to us. ISIL is really the vanguard of a Sunni Islamist assault to eject Iranian power and influence from the Middle East, particularly Iran's allies in Damascus and Baghdad. That's their principal focus. And to some extent, they threaten some of the Sunni kingdoms, emirates in the Arabian Peninsula, where the rulers do not rule strongly or effectively, and corruption is a problem. But their principal enemy is Shia Islam.
Zainab, how about your thoughts?
I think that we definitely cannot discount the threat that ISIS poses. I think the fact that they have been successful in recruiting individuals to their ranks from both the United States and from European countries, I think it's important that we take this threat seriously. The fact that they are expanding, they're gaining ground in Iraq, that they've approached Baghdad, they've approached the border with Turkey. I think it's important for us to realize that they do pose a credible threat. And the result of this is that we have to make sure that whatever strategy we employ in eradicating ISIS takes into account the fact that we have to be able to combat the very sophisticated propaganda that they've been able to use to recruit individuals to join their ranks.
And see, that's a recurring thing, this recruitment and what they're doing online to do that. Chairman Steele.
Yeah, I think they are a clear and at present danger. There's no doubt about that. The beheadings, not just of American and British citizens, French citizens, but also of other Muslims and others that they happen to capture. That tells me that, as a baseline, there's a problem here. That they have a level of fearlessness that we should be concerned about. That their philosophy, whether it's religious-based or just some other way-based, just the way they think about the world, is a devaluing of life, a centralized purpose and goal that is using effectively military sources, that is using propaganda very well. That to me says that this is a different kind of enemy. This is not Al-Qaeda. This is not Saddam Hussein. This isn't even Osama bin Laden. This is a very different political / military and terrorist threat that we have not witnessed before, which means that on our end, we have to be up to the task. We have to look at both our interests there and here at the homeland. We have to be prepared to secure our interests there and here. And that, in my estimation, involves something that both the Bush administration as well as the Obama administration has been woeful at, and that is building the intelligence, the human intelligence on the ground to understand this enemy in whatever form it happens to manifest itself. And it starts with understanding the people and where what's really motivating.
Yeah, we'll get into that, I'm hoping to, coming down the road. Faheem?
First thing, I think it's important to know what is ISIS. To me, the collateral damage of 2003 is the ISIS of 2013. That is the first step. We need to remember that as heinous, as barbaric they are, we need to remember that it is the collateral damage, the innocent civilians lost in a useless war that created this monster in part. Why is that relevant? Because today, again, we are talking of military action. ISIS in itself is 30,000 people. They can't even fill a stadium. We can get rid of them like this. It's the idea of ISIS. It's the ideology that we went after 10 years ago, and I believe we lost because we went fighting Al-Qaeda at the shores of Arabian Sea, today only to find them at the shores of Mediterranean Sea. So the reality is we're losing the war of ideology. We need to fight the ideology of ISIS. How do you do that? You replace it with a better idea. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community believes that this heinous crime against humanity, this version of Islam, has to be replaced with a better version of Islam.
All right, thank you for that. We'll get into that some more. Omri.
ISIS is really one of two extremist strands right now. We've heard correctly that it is the vanguard of the Sunni extremist strand that is sweeping parts of the region and is at the threshold, or rather is at war with several representatives of a different extremist strand, which is the Shia strand, which is anchored by Iran. And sometimes those two strands end up fighting, but more of the time they end up cooperating to push out the moderates. And what we've seen in places like Syria specifically is cooperation between Iranian-funded, Iranian-anchored, Iranian-supported elements, specifically the Assad regime, of course, cooperating with the ISIL-style extremists to really eradicate the moderates who might build a better future for everybody in the region. And I think that the other panelists are right. Whether they minimize the threat in one direction, they say ISIL just can't do much, or that ISIL can be easily dealt with, I think they're fundamentally right. The real threat to the region is that the mischief that Iran is sowing across the region allows Sunni extremism as the only other alternative to take hold.
All right, well, let's go right now to our audience. We've got some people here who have some questions. Allison?
Leon, I have Musa Assad here. Where are you from?
I'm from the Howard County region.
Okay, what is your question tonight?
So my question, good evening to the esteemed panelists. This is really a question to everyone, is to flesh out a little bit more this question of really what is the new threat in our daily lives? Is it clear and imminent danger? What are we really afraid of here? And I draw your attention to things that usually aren't covered in the media. Last month, earlier this month actually, over 2 million Muslims around the world carried out a pilgrimage to Mecca called Hajj that everyone knows, but it's not covered. On 9/11 at Capitol Hill, actually, there was a Muslims for Life blood drive campaign to save lives, and many others all across the nation, been going on for years, saving over hundreds of thousands of lives. And then on the other hand, you look at leading causes of death here in the U.S. CDC reports, for example, has now in the top 10 almost 40,000 suicides.
Yep.
A gentleman talked earlier about suicide bombers. 40,000 American citizens killing themselves. So open up for discussion in the panel. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anybody have any thoughts?
I think that's a brilliant question. On one end, we say, where are the moderate Muslims? On the other end, they're everywhere. I believe Islam is moderate. There is, in fact, extremist Islam is an oxymoron. But where is the media? My question is not where are the moderate Muslims. Where are thought leaders? Where are policy leaders? Where are government leaders? Where is the media when the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, just to give you one example, raises 10,000 units of blood every September to commemorate 9/11? Where is the media?
See, Colonel?
I'd like to go back and to the man's fundamental question, which I think also is, what's the military threat? There is none. The last time we had a serious military threat to the United States, there were Soviet nuclear missile submarines patrolling off our coast, carrying theater ballistic missiles that could kill hundreds of thousands of Americans in the space of a few minutes. There's nothing like that. And the 30,000 men who are primarily mounted in pickup trucks, they have captured some other equipment, but based on my own personal experience in the Middle East, I can tell you the likelihood of that equipment that they've captured running for very long without repair parts and people who are technically qualified to maintain them is low. So I don't see a major threat there. What we're witnessing in the region is something that we have definitely, as my colleague suggested earlier, helped to create, but it's not ours. It's not a war about us. It's about the Sunni and the Shia and the various actors in the region who are now positioning themselves for dominance there. We don't need to participate in this particular scrimmage.
But Colonel, if I may, one of the things that we keep hearing about is their outreach online. And we've had a case here, at least one in this country, a situation in Oklahoma, where a person who said that they were emulating what they had heard from ISIS online beheaded a woman at a plant in Oklahoma. That sort of thing is the kind of thing that plants in people's minds that there is a threat to the United States. There is a threat here.
Well, if I could hit that real quick. Doug and I will disagree on certain points of this. Doug is absolutely correct. Right now, there is no clear military reason for us to do what we're doing. There is not. We're basically kind of just churning the chaos with what little we're doing. Either you're in it to win it, or you need to not be there at all, because it just is going to bring them here. And that's the point.
Well, there's nothing to win,
well,
in my judgment.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Right.
What I'm saying, though, is that because we are now churning, we are now made ourselves a target again, you have the online recruitment. I've actually watched some of these videos of these individuals, Canadians, as a matter of fact, who have talked about the fact that they're proud of the fact that they're getting trained to come and do martyrdom operations, which is the word for suicide bombing. So within the context of the fact we've involved ourselves, we have to be vigilant of the fact that people are going to come here to do something. There's ways of ratcheting down the chaos, but it may require that we allow the Iraqi nation to dissolve into 3 different countries, into Sunni, Shia, and Kurd, because to put the force in there, to pull it all back together, would require another invasion of
Wait a
size.
minute, you said we allow? We allow? Who are we to determine anything in the region? This is insane. This is a supposition that somehow or another we can manipulate these people and create some sort of outcome that favors us. Haven't we learned that's an impossibility?
But I think
it's important to also make sure that we allow the Iraqi people to also govern themselves. Part of the problem that led to the formation of ISIS is the fact that there was a government in control, a regime who actually helped to create sectarian strife. And part of the United States' role in helping to cultivate a more peaceful democratic society in that part of the world is to make sure that there's a government in place that is uniform in the way that it treats the different sects within Iraq. Whether it's our place to say that it's okay to create 3 separate entities within Iraq, I don't think that that's the United States' role. I think that we should focus on issues that affect Americans here at home.
It's a very weird definition of American interests that would limit those interests only to attacks on the homeland. Smart diplomacy, it would seem, would include assisting our allies in protecting themselves in the region. Now, they are thinning, and they are under assault, and they are under siege. But to say that we don't have interest in the region, or that we don't have, with due respect, a reason to be there to protect our traditional pragmatic Arab allies in the Gulf, it seems strained.
But what happened to liberty, justice for all?
Recognize when the fact that in the past, since 1980, we have targeted military campaigns. We've either occupied or invaded or bombed 14 countries within the Middle East. And if we think about how that's manifested, how that's benefited American interests, either whether in the region, abroad, or whether here at home. It's taken an enormous toll on our economy, on the image of Americans abroad. Really, we have to think about before we wage these kind of military
that's why you see the president. It's interesting that for all the divisions in the Congress, no one is contradicting the notion that there should be no boots on the ground. The reason that, I mean, we tried that. It was, of all the wars this country has ever fought, this was the biggest mistake. I do agree we have interest in the region. The question is, what role do we have? It seems to me, yes, the bombing is not enough, but nobody comes up, nobody has the nerve to say, therefore put boots on the ground. I want to know where the people in the region are on the ground. I mean, it is our job to do what they cannot do for themselves. And I don't think they can do the bombings. But
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it comes back to why can they not do the bombings? And I think it's important to also look back at the factors that allowed groups like ISIS to take form. And the fact that there was military intervention, the fabricated weapons of mass destruction that helped create instability in the region, that destabilized the country, that claimed millions of Iraqi lives, that created refugees all across the region.
So you think nothing should be done then?
No, I'm not saying that nothing should be done.
If I may, I'd like to dovetail, or just to jump on that, because one of the things that I've heard a number of times about the reason why there are no other Muslim boots on the ground in countries that don't want to put their boots on the ground is that because no Muslim nation wants to be seen as the one that prevented the caliphate that was predicted or called for in the Quran to be formed. Is that true?
Look, I will defer to those who are more familiar with the theology, but let's be frank. The Turks have no interest in destroying ISIS because ISIS is destroying enemies of the Turks. The Turkish president is a Sunni Islamist. He is cooperating with the Saudis. The Saudis now regard ISIL with a certain degree of fear, but they and the Turks and the Qataris and other Sunni Islamists in the region have contributed the money, the supplies, and helped the recruits to reach this. On the other side, you have the Shiites. You have Iran. You have the Assad. You have the Baghdad Shiite Arab rump state in southern Iraq. They are allied, and by the way, they are in coalition with Russia against the Sunnis. Now, the issue that I have is, first of all, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, together have thousands of aircraft, thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of troops. The Turkish army is the largest in NATO. It's far larger than the United States Army. They have no interest in destroying ISIL. So under the circumstances, why are we so terribly interested in destroying something that the states in the region themselves are not interested in fighting?
So you're saying then that there's no option, there's no way to create. We've got a coalition of 60 countries. You're saying that it's not a real coalition.
Come on, I've been down that road. I went down that road during the Kosovo air campaign. I saw it in Haiti. I've seen it over and over again. You know, we recruit states to confer legitimacy on us. We promise their army free boots. You know, I mean, this kind of nonsense. Forget it. The coalition's meaningless.
I think there's some value in the proposition that, you know, the U.S. has a role, and I think the Congresswoman is exactly right. The question is, how do we define that role in a post-9/11 environment? The idea of nation building is something I think most Americans in large measure have turned away from. That concept is not in our national interest. Because of the consequences, the ramifications, and especially the cost. But there is also, in this particular instance, and you've touched on it, the fact that as much as everyone's talking about what the U.S. needs to do, what the U.S. must do, trust me, the folks over there are happy to see the U.S. doing whatever the U.S. is doing, because it furthers what limited interest they have at that moment. It keeps them off the firing line. Certain nations do not want to be seen engaging militarily against another Muslim nation. There are all these other aspects of this that we have allowed ourselves to get caught up into. And instead of being the parent, if you will, and stepping back and saying, look, you guys, you work this out and let me know how this works itself out. We step in and we break up a fight where ostensibly there is no fight. and arguably create one. And so I think that we've got to look at this a little bit from distance as opposed to rushing in as we have, as you've noted in the past.
Well, I've got to step in right now because we have someone online right now. Scott, what are you seeing over there?
Yeah, there are a couple things social media-wise that we want to get to. One, though, is in regards to social media that's being used by ISIL. Look, we just saw the 5th edition now of the English translated magazine that they are using effectively to reach out to people in the West. We know that while Twitter often takes down feeds pretty quickly, ISIL's had a little more success with Facebook, certainly with YouTube, and people wonder what influence it's having on Westerners who may be convincible, for lack of a better word. And so we should talk about that. And secondly, at Wax Eloquent just tweeted us saying, what is the most effective organized group of Muslims to supplant the spiritual foundation of ISIL? Deep question there.
Interesting.
I'd like to comment on that. So my organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, has really been at the forefront of making sure that not just American Muslims, but also Muslims globally, and also the public, general public, is aware of the fact that even though ISIL, this group, claims to represent the ideals of Islam, it in no way, shape, or form represents the true tenets of Islam. And we've not only issued numerous condemnations calling out their actions and the brutal, barbaric, horrific acts that they've been engaged in, but we've also published a letter that's been signed by almost 130 Muslim scholars and leaders worldwide. And it's a step-by-step letter that points out 24 key points of how the actions of this barbaric group in no way, shape, or form reflect the ideals of Islam. Right. And this is something that we've been using, we've been publicizing to raise awareness to susceptible youth who might otherwise be frustrated about what's going on in the region, who might otherwise be more susceptible or vulnerable to becoming recruited, to help raise awareness that this is not a legitimate organization that's going to help.
All right, let's get to another question we have here in the audience. Allison?
Okay, Leon, I have Stuart Rosenblatt here from Loudoun County, and I understand, Stuart, you have a legislative question tonight.
Yes, I do. My question pertains to a bill that's in the U.S. Congress gathering a lot of support. It's for the whole panel, especially Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Steele, and the Congresswoman. It's H.Res. 428, introduced by Walter Jones. Steve Lynch now has Lacey Clay, Steve Stockman, Ted Yoho, and Charlie Rangel, and a completely wild variety to declassify the original chapter of the 9/11 report that purports to show that Saudi Arabia was directly responsible for orchestrating and funding the attacks on the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, etc. According to Senator Bob Graham, who chaired and wrote the report and is demanding that it be declassified, there's a direct connection between ISIL today and Saudi Arabia funding and orchestrating them. My question is very simple. Would you support the declassification? And it's been supported now by the chairs of the 9/11 Commission, numerous top people.
All right, let's let them answer that then.
Well, full disclosure, I work with Walter Jones on that, so I'm clearly for it. And I agree with your assessment regarding the Saudis. The Saudis have been behind the scenes on doing a lot of things, and this may get me in trouble, maybe not. Joe Biden was completely correct when he talked about certain allies funding both sides of this. And the Saudis have been one of those groups, not necessarily the government, but members of the royal family have chipped in and actually done this. So a lot of the things we actually fight militarily have been funded by the very allies we're trying to support. So this is something I agree with Walter on. He's a dear friend, that we need to get clarification on exactly who we're dealing with, how we're dealing with them. So, Michael?
No, I'd absolutely agree. I think a lot of the confusion, frustration, and anger that we've seen among the American people and even among some of our allies from time to time emanates from the fact that what we don't know. And that we do tend to hide behind, non-disclosure, secret information, and all this. At this point in time, to put it in context and perspective, I think it would be an important move to help bring closure to some extent on 9/11, but then to help us better understand what we're dealing with right now, because we don't.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of my colleagues here. But I can't even imagine why, 12, 13 years after 9/11, why this would still be classified in the first place. Secondly, I'm all for exposing the Saudis. I think this double, triple role that they play, yes, they're an ally of the United States, but everybody needs to know who they really are. If they did know who they really are, that could bring some pressure on them, especially as they now, of course, are allegedly funding ISIS and everybody else that's bad.
With that, let me read something to you real quickly if I can. This is something that Marine Lieutenant General Trainer wrote. The Saudis despise the Iranians, but will cut deals with them if doing so is in their interest. Iran will play any card necessary to achieve regional hegemony. Turkey is coy about its own quest for preeminence. The Gulf states talk out of both sides of their mouths. Syrian dictator Bashar Assad uses the Islamic State to create problems for other rebels. Iraq plays at democracy as long as it can subjugate the Sunnis. Shiites and Sunnis fight each other while carrying on intramural warfare with their kinsmen. The double dealing is almost endless. It doesn't make sense to us, but it does to the players. Does that make sense to anybody here?
Well, it goes to what I've said a little bit earlier, and what we've been talking about this evening is that's a level of human intelligence and understanding that the U.S. lacks.
Well, how do we unravel
that? We don't understand the dynamics. We don't appreciate the dynamics. We're talking about thousands of years of history when you couple all of those countries and their legacies, their traditions, their battles, intramural or otherwise. And we are 200 and some years in the game. And yeah, we've got bigger guns and a bigger bullhorn. But at the end of the day, the question that I think the U.S. has to ask itself, again, in this post 9/11 era, where we have different strains of terrorist threats arising, it's what's at the root of this, and how do we better understand it so that we don't make the silly mistakes that we've made in the past?
Yeah, but Leon, look, what you described is what we've been trying to get across. Clearly, the solution is to bomb, is it not? Doesn't that make a great deal of sense now? To mobilize thousands of American aircraft and servicemen and launch expensive munitions, where we're spending several $1 million to destroy a pickup truck that you can buy for $20,000 or $30,000.
But Colonel,
this is insane.
That's what people say they want once they turn the television on and they see a man beheaded.
I'm not
Particularly
sure.
if they see
Leon, I'm not
one of
sure
their
that's
countrymen
true.
beheaded.
Leon, I'm not sure that's true.
It's actually, listen, we're getting very close again, unfortunately, to saying it's really complicated. Let's not do anything. But there are ways to untangle the region. The region is hopelessly complicated. It has 3 players that are bouncing off each other. But at the end of the day, those 3 players see each other as divided into 3 camps. A camp of Shia extremists that is anchored by Iran, a camp of Sunni extremists that ISIL is at the forefront of, and then America's traditional allies, the Jordanians, the Israelis, the Egyptian army now, elements of the Palestinian Authority, and they bounce off of each other. Of course they do. But that doesn't mean that we can't identify allies and enemies. It doesn't mean we can't identify hostiles and friends.
I see Faheem shaking his head.
Yeah,
there.
because I think it's interesting. First of all, quick disclaimer, I'm not Sunni, I'm not Shia, I'm Ahmadiyya. It rhymes, so it's easy for you to now remember. And I think there is a point I'm going to make here. Many of my Muslim friends here will know that the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we have been barred. We have been declared non-Muslims by Pakistan, by the second largest, most populated Muslim country. The reality is there is a virus in the body of Islam. We cannot deny that. There is a tumor in the brain of Islam today. The heart is good. The body is good. That's the one point where I disagree with the colonel. Thank God he's not a neurosurgeon, because if he were a neurosurgeon, he'd be doing surgery with an axe. You can't bomb people. You can't just use that kind of inflammatory language for 1.6 billion people. You need to allow us to figure out our differences, whether they're Sunni, Shia, Ahmadiyya. There is a place for every kind of ideology. Why this is important? I think the people need to go and do some research in this. The caliphate, this word that we now have latched on. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community 120 years ago denounced that you can't use sword to spread religion. We said anyone is free to choose. There is no punishment for apostasy. We said people should have complete freedom of expression. We said that wherever you live, you need to be loyal to that country. And how have we captured that message for 125 years? Because we do have a spiritual caliphate. That is what the world needs today. Yes, far-fetched, some people will shake their head. I will say, bring me a better solution and we'll talk about it. But I'm not giving you an idea. I'm putting a product on the table. I'm saying, here is a product, take a look at it. You can look at the position that we've taken for 120 years. There is no other group that has that long of a history.
Interesting. Very interesting. We
Leanne,
have another
like
question.
I'm sorry. I would just
real
like
quickly.
to briefly. I'm sorry. I would just like to briefly add on to what Faheem said. I think that there are definitely bad people within Islam, and I think it's also important to note that there are bad apples in every religion. Just like there are extremists within Islam who, in no way, shape, or form represent the elements of the religion, there are also extremist factions within all religions. And for anyone to say that it's okay to cherry pick verses from holy texts and use that to justify treatment, whether it's horrible treatment against other sects within the same religion or whether it's mistreatment of individuals of other religions. That's just grossly, it's just wrong.
Yeah. And I don't think you'll have any argument here in this room.
Sure.
Allison, we'll get back to you in just a second, Colonel. Another question from the audience. Allison?
Okay, Leon, I'm here with Tarek McDonald. Tarek's also from Loudoun County, Virginia. And it sounds like your question really goes right along with this line of conversation.
Okay. Well, recently, I think a fatwa committee, I think it was in Egypt, I forget where it was exactly, but anyway, because ISIL's actions are very un-Islamic and they don't represent anything in the Quran or Sunnah, this fatwa committee wanted to rename ISIL as Al-Qaeda separatists in Iraq and Syria, or QSIS, but a lot of Muslim organizations didn't even care, and the media in particular, they haven't jumped in on that. I'm just wondering what your stance on that is.
I think that that's a really interesting question, if I may weigh in on that. I think the naming of the organization is really important because it's actually helped for them to advance their agendas and their ideologies. The fact that they have called themselves the Islamic State, the fact that they claim to have established a caliphate, the fact that they have a banner on which is the Shahada, which is the Islamic Declaration of Faith, all of these are elements of their branding that they've used to appeal to the oppressed minority Sunni faction within Iraq. And it's been very, very interesting because it's had a huge role to play in helping them to gain support within the region. So one of the things that my organization has been doing is we've been encouraging not just the media, but also the public to not refer to them as the Islamic State.
Colonel Schaefer?
Well, this is where I think the concepts of what we can do something comes together with the concepts of the religion. Doug and I think everybody would agree, we don't want to be involved in the decisions regarding the faith, who does what within that. But there is something we have already done. We've laid the groundwork for a thread to be pulled now. Every military that's been mentioned of the allies we have been trained by us. The Egyptians, the Jordanians. So one of the things we've put forward is the idea of an Arab NATO. Now, I know people are going to look at that and say, oh my God, they'll never cooperate, but this is what I think they will. Because we have actually trained these folks to be above the religious issues. So I'm arguing, if we want to be helpful for our allies, create the framework, like we did with Europe, to create the path for the European Union, where we actually we've trained the military. The militaries are loyal to the concepts that we put forth for them. And the idea is to make that the framework to allow for a safe area for the countries to protect and allow the religious issues to be worked through.
But Colonel, did we not also train the Iraqi army?
Yeah.
And they have been said, it's been said that was one of the biggest underestimations that we've made so far. They gave up 2 bases this week alone.
They were not ready.
Jeez.
So, but the question, so they're not ready. So the question is, when are they ready, and how much more does that cost to get them ready? And then what does that require of us as a presence on the ground to do that? And again, these are questions that fundamentally you need to have at least a base understanding or some framework to begin to answer before you begin to engage.
But look, we have to step back and understand that Saudi Arabia, the various Emirates, Yemen, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, these places are not nation states in the sense of Germany or France or Great Britain or Canada or the United States. These are recent creations. These are part of the outcome of the First World War and the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. These are artificial constructs in most cases. They're breaking down. They are not enduring, and they are going to continue to disintegrate, and the region is going to emerge in a new form. Bombing it won't help it. Bombing it will make it worse. We need to stay out of it. We don't have an interest in disentangling the actors. They have to do that themselves. And before there was a United States of America, for about 5,000 years, the region took care of itself.
Could I just say something to that? Because, that given the Iraq War and for that matter, wars before, in a sense, yeah, that would seem to be the way we'd want to go. I think we have to face something. It's very difficult for me to face. And that is that when there is a major outpouring of crisis in the world, it's impossible for us to say, just let them go at it. Right. Boy, would I like to do that. I agree, we do have interest there. It's not as if, you know, this is a place on which we are or have been engaged. And I haven't heard any of my colleagues say what would happen if we did nothing. Right. God knows I would rather have nothing to do with this. But I don't think, given the role that the United States of America plays in the world, that I can fail to see that wherever you are, nations will look to the United States for leadership. We are not a sectarian power. We are seen as an honest broker.
10-second comment.
Okay, real quickly.
Just 10-second comment. Every time we say national interest, do we understand how unjust we come across? Mm-hmm. Do we understand that we lose trust right and left? Because the world, you know, where is liberty and justice for all?
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about national interests.
And
do we understand how unjust we come across?
We have interest there. That's different from national interest.
But our interest should be justice. Our interest should be fairness and justice. We should not be talking in terms of nations.
Have we actually checked that the actors in the region
Yes.
don't want us there?
Yes.
Because, no, our diplomats come back and they say,
are not telling you the truth.
They say they're getting told,
Yeah.
where is America? That's what our diplomats come back
That's
saying.
what they'll always tell you, but that's not true. And in most cases,
and you say that on the basis of
personal experience. When you talk to someone who is, you know, from Bahrain or from Dubai or from, they have an interest in using us to further their own interests, to pursue their agenda. No, we don't. We just do business with them. That is not Kansas. That is the Middle East. It doesn't belong to us. They're not part of the United States, and we don't want to rule it.
That's true.
It's their country.
I agree and I disagree. Can I say one thing real quick? I have talked to the Yazidi, I have talked to the Assyrians, I have talked to the Christian Iraqis who have done nothing to bring on the plague that now beseeches their houses. I've talked to folks on the Capitol Hill, members who said they're getting calls from families saying they've been subjugated by ISIS and they would rather have us bomb them to death than continue to be raped. So either we do something or we go home. If we're going to do something, we better do it to win it. And we better pull our allies together to bring the coalition on to do something. Because either we're in it or we're not. But we have to do something along that line.
Let's go back over here to Scott. I think Scott's got something online that's right along these lines. Scott?
Yeah, Leon, something we're seeing a lot of chatter on right now, and people using our hashtag, of course, Your Voice, Your Future. They're discussing the fact that social media allows for us to examine the reality of something that might happen domestically. And I know we've heard from the panel that perhaps the threat isn't as severe as we're hearing it. But over the weekend, there was an alert that went out to law enforcement officers that they may be targets here domestically from what you heard James Comey call lone rats. So people want to know, what is the legitimate fear here at home? And secondly, an interesting social media question was about women protesting. And what role do women play? Because on the platforms of social media, for example, Twitter, women there in the conflict are tweeting out pictures of themselves holding up signs indicating how much they are being sold for to this group, to the Islamic State, signs saying $100 to $500. And they want to know, does that help further the desire to help those people?
Sounds like what you were talking about.
I'm familiar with the cyber issue. There was actually a father-son Air Force enlisted member targeted by ISIS. They actually went about doing a very sophisticated reconnaissance in cyberspace. This is a very sophisticated cyber operation where they're actually going to IPs, they were able to map things out, and actually, essentially, virtually get these guys completely mapped. And this is why an alert went out. Some of you may have seen it. Fox News reported on it. There was an alert that went out to the community. It talked about the fact that ISIS is now targeting military members. It's real. It's happening. And I've talked to the folks who have been monitoring these guys. This is one of the most sophisticated hack jobs they've ever seen. So ISIS has recruited, whether they're true believers or not, I don't know. They've recruited some real talent to do this. Now, what our concern is, and what I'm concerned regarding the physical security issue, is if you can map somebody to that level, It's one step removed from sending someone who is essentially self-recruited, radicalized to do something physically. So in this case, the cyber reality and the physical reality are very closely linked, and I think it's a valid issue we need to be concerned about.
That makes me wonder, are they smarter than us?
No.
If they can figure that
Absolutely
sort of thing out
not.
and they can stay a step ahead.
The cyber warfare capability of the drug cartels in Mexico is larger than the capacity of the U.S. Army's cyber warfare capability. But I am not advocating that we bomb Mexico. There is increasingly a metastasizing body of terrorism and criminality in the Caribbean basin. I'm not advocating that we bomb Venezuela and Colombia. You secure your borders. That's what you do. You don't invade another country. This has got to stop. It's counterproductive and self-defeating. And what you're hearing when somebody says, well, we need to do something, the question is something. What is something? What are we doing something for? Whom are we making happy by doing something? Well, there's nothing there that is worthy of the loss of an American life. Clearly, we don't want to sacrifice American lives. So we'll bomb from 30,000 feet. This is crazy. It's got to stop. If you're not willing to put American lives on the line, don't go. That's the lesson. And we need to stay out.
Okay, well, right now we need to go over to Allison. We've got to try to get as many questions as we can in here from the audience. Allison, do you have another question for us?
Yes, Leon, thank you. From Montgomery County tonight, Nathan Hahn is here. He has two very quick questions. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, distinguished panelists. This is a follow-on to Colonel Schaefer, but what's the end game in Iraq and Syria? I mean, is there an exit strategy? Do we go in with overwhelming force and get it over with? Or do we continue in this? Because President Obama hasn't even requested formal authorization from Congress yet.
He should request authorization.
Yeah, he should.
Absolutely. With that said, there's no clear end state, and this is where Doug and I think would agree, there's no there to get to at this point in time. The stated goal, that I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is to sustain the central Iraqi government. Central Iraqi government no longer exists. It's gone. There's no military to sustain it. Therefore, we have to figure out what's next then and what our interests are. And this is where, again, I get with Doug. What exactly are our interests? We really not define those interests and then match military capacity to achieve those goals. We have not done that. So this is where, what we're doing right now is only adding to the chaos. We have to define what our strategic interests are in the region first. And I've been working with members of Congress. I was over on the Hill at the Senate yesterday briefing some folks on these are the things you need to look at to define what exactly our authorization is going to be for, and then figure out how we're going to do it. Truth be told, we could wipe out ISIS militarily in probably a month. We did it in Afghanistan with the Northern Alliance as our ally. We wiped out the Taliban in 42 days. Yeah. And a country larger than Iraq. It can be done. The Turkish army, as Doug stipulated, is the largest in NATO. There's no political will to do what's necessary to achieve victory. So this is why I agree with Doug. Either we're in it to win it, or we need to step back and let things kind of settle for themselves.
It is a simple question, but maybe the most important one.
Yeah,
what does
exactly.
the end look like?
I think we are all talking about the front end of it, which is bombing, military. The end game, as you ask, America is not ready for that real conversation, because when we left Afghanistan, 50% of Afghanistan's population was under the age of 15. With the price of one B-2 bomber, we could have educated the whole of Afghanistan for the next 10 years. We chose not to. And that's exactly what we continue to do. With 1% of our annual defense budget, that will be over $7 billion. You could spread 1,000 hospitals and 1,000 schools across Middle East. I know people will laugh and call it naivety, but you ask me end game, that is the way to the end game, where you come across as liberty and justice for all, as fairness, as nation building, regain the trust that we've lost. Today, they don't want to listen to us. And we just go in, bomb, and then like a dirty socks, we leave Middle East back there and hope that they'll forget. People don't forget, my friend.
Congresswoman, I want to hear
I think it's really important to also make sure that we support democracy in the region. I think if there's going to be an end game in sight, then we have to make sure that we empower factions within Iraq and Syria that support democracy in the region. The fact Assad has been in power for so long, and there has been a 3+ year civil war in Syria that has displaced killed over 200,000 Syrians, and it's displaced millions of Syrians into neighboring countries. I think that's also something that we should really think about. For the first 3 years of this conflict, the entire world did nothing.
That's a long conversation we could have after we've seen what's happened in Algeria, Libya. that's another conversation for another night. I think Allison's got one other question we want to get to as soon as we can. We got just a little bit of time left.
Yes, we have Patricia Salisbury here with us tonight, also from Loudoun County, Virginia. Patricia, what's your question?
Okay, my question concerns leadership, and it's addressed to our audience here and to the larger audience listening, as well as to the panel. I mean, we clearly now, with the Ebola threat and the way it's unraveling, have a government incapable of dealing with the crises we face. You know, we referenced the 28 pages. We have a president who continues a policy of covering up for the very terrorists we are supposedly fighting. So my question is this: when is the population going to demand that Congress come back into session and actually sweep aside both the misleadership in the presidency and the misleadership at the top of the Republican Party, and return us to policies you know, of actual economic development, whereby we can deal with the crises in the world without bombing them, and we can also deal with the fact that our taking down of our infrastructure, our health system, means we now have an existential threat to our population and to the world's population as this Ebola threat unfolds.
Well, why don't we let the one member of Congress here speak to that? You could actually start by actually coming back and voting on whether or not we are going to have a war.
I don't know if you noticed, but increasingly, on both sides of the aisle, people are calling for a vote. And you should also notice that the polls are showing that the American people not only want to vote, but increasingly are warming to being there. And I think, again, this goes back to the point I made earlier. When they see a crisis in the world, they think we ought to be in it. I take your point, though, that is this a crisis, given the history of the Middle East, that anybody from the West getting into does anything but exacerbate.
Then what does the end look like to you?
No, nobody knows. Well, the president is very honest on that. He said this will go on for a long time, and he doesn't even pretend that we have an end game or a get out game. It's going to go on past when he is in office. That bothers me a great deal, because I'm not prepared for another long, drawn-out war in the Middle East.
All right, Allison, we have one more question from the audience.
All right, one final question, sir. What's your name?
Bill Bushka.
What's your question, Bill?
Oh, have we covered the really existential threats like radioactive bombs and localized EMP devices and that sort of thing that we've heard talked about before? Bioterror. Is ISIS really capable of carrying that out? I think it probably isn't, but that's on our mind. The things that could literally destroy our society that were discussed after 9/11. Is that really a threat now?
There actually have been reports that chemical weapons have been found or used on the field.
Yeah, well,
right?
Doug, I think look, EMP, no way. EMP takes electromagnetic pulse.
Grossly exaggerated.
Yeah, that's way out there. We in the Soviets, I'm sorry, the Russians, that's a slip, have that. So a loose nuke is something that Al-Qaeda and its affiliates have always wanted. The going price, for those of you who have $400 million, you can buy a loose nuke on the black market if you can figure out a way to do all that. They have the money, but I don't think they have the method to get to it. So I don't think you have to worry about that at this point in time.
Well, there's good reason to be concerned, for instance, about Pakistan,
yes,
which has nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Pakistan is hardly stable, and it is absolutely a hotbed of radicalism and hatred for the West, for Israel, for anyone that they don't particularly care for, including India. We don't know what could happen in Pakistan over the next 6 months or a year, depending upon the forces in that country. That's worth considering. Again, the solution is not to invade Pakistan or to threaten to bomb it. I'm just pointing that's quite serious. But no, ISIL, ISIS, whatever you want to call them right now, no, they are not in a position to do any of those things to us.
There was a question, the last two questions that we had kind of suggest each other, which is, what should we be worried about, and what are we ready to demand that Congress does? And the idea that, we should bomb people is not an idea that we began today by saying, do we think the strategy of just bombing is something that can work? And, you know, the American people are warming to that. It avoids a loss of life. It gives the appearance that we can do something. And the American people, at the end of the day, like bombing bad people. But I think all the panelists are united in saying that, listen, if we have interest there, and I certainly believe we do, and I think that it's relatively easy to see that, we've got to step up and secure those interests. We can't just bomb. That's not what anybody's advocating.
All right, let's see what we have coming on online. Scott, we only have a couple of minutes left. Scott, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, real briefly, and we talked about the threat here at home and how real it exists. And Khorasan, of course, one of the offshoots there that are a concern, has shown the ability to attack or at least to get some sort of devices through airport security. People are worried about that. But as a total contrarian tweet here that we just got, people are asking, to put it in perspective, should we be more concerned about ISIS and that threat and ISIL or Ebola here in the U.S.? And it's a perspective question.
Well, I'm waiting for the day when someone in the media will say that Ebola is Muslim. Because the kind of Islamophobia this country has seen in the post 9/11 America is really hitting a fever pitch. And being an infectious disease doctor, I can guarantee you that Ebola, guarantee is too strong of a word, I take it back. But I can tell you that Ebola will not be as big of a threat as ISIS will be for the whole world, and the way this thing is going to evolve, because Ebola will come and go. This ideology is here to stay.
You sound like the Muslims I've heard who resent being held accountable or being...
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I said that, you know, you're trying to chop out that small tumor, those bad apples, as Zainab very rightly said, exist in every faith with an axe. And I'm not ready to let such a neurosurgeon operate on my brain.
Yeah, but let's keep something in mind.
Final thoughts here.
While the doctor is no doubt right about his own opinions and the opinions of many Muslims here in the United States, the truth is that ISIS is actually very popular among the Sunni Muslims in the region because ISIS is successful. Right. And ISIS is attacking people they think deserve to die.
Well,
and that has to be borne in mind. So again,
and
it has nothing to do with us.
We're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time. This has been just the fastest moving hour. I want to thank you all so much for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us here in the panel and here in the audience. And those of you who weighed in online as well, thank you so much for watching. And now you've been informed, now you can have your vote. Thanks for joining us.